Oh my God, Jimmy and his ride with Maverick at that home was absolutely friggin' adorable.
Was that not the cutest thing ever?
Absolutely. If I could frame that video, I would.
So we went to a furniture store today and bought him a new big boy bed. It's a floor bed, but it's got like a I'm told it's a place where he can sit because the whole surround is padded, and it's going to be used as a slide, whether his parents want to acknowledge that or not. So one side has like a padded top and then a bookshelf that goes the length of the bed. The other side is about 3 times as wide, and it's got like a level off place at the top that's like 2 feet, and then it goes down a dip and then comes back up. And I looked at them and I said, that's definitely a slide. He goes, I think it's a chair. And I said, I don't care what it is, it's going to be a slide.
That's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun making a slide bunk bed thing. And
well, we'll talk about that when he gets about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Because
it looks like a ship, but it's going to come.
Yeah. We definitely don't need him crawling on or climbing on anything like that in the near future, but it's definitely in his future. We'll have to come up and pick it up.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
I know. All right. So, where we left off, we're in Florida, and we're talking about the DuPont family fortune from the renegade that came down to Jacksonville, died, left it supposedly in a foundation for sick people, but their conniving did not give them their portion of the money every year. And swarming around everything that they're doing is the Mafia, the CIA, and a bunch of other nefarious people. So that's kind of where we were at. And we're going to pick up in January 1984. We were talking about at the very end yesterday about the Meyerland Shopping Center. That was the older lady that didn't really want to sell, and she's in Houston. And then she didn't really want to sell because she said that it was $35 million, but she didn't want the people who bought it to tear down the shopping center because it was one of the primary shopping locations for the entire neighborhood. They were all their friends because they had had it for so long, blah, blah, blah. All right. So the Meyerland Shopping Center is sold January 1984. Leota Hess and her family sold the stock in their company, Meyerland Company, which owned some other property in addition to the shopping center. They sold it to a company called Vorvados, Vorvados, who happened to be registered in the Isle of Jersey. The same day, Vorvados flipped the property to DGI for apparently twice the amount of money. So they paid about $35 million for it. They sold it the exact same day they bought it for $70 million. Atkinson said later that he represented Vorvados and then decided to buy the shopping center himself. The entire deal was financed with a $58 million loan from Lamar Savings in Austin. But the collateral for the Lamar loan was only the east half of the shopping center. Now, the shopping center already is not worth $35 million. That's just what the family wanted, and that's what they paid. It was worth about $25 million. So they've now already sold it for $70 million. It's not worth that. Nowhere near that. But they got a loan from Lamar Savings for $58 million when it's not worth 25. And only part of the shopping center. was used as collateral. This means that in one day, Atkinson and his cohorts had taken a property worth $25 million and inflated it to about $100 million. The purpose of that exercise was to borrow more money from the banks in savings and loan. Eventually, the loans against the property would total $150,000. That meant someone was going to lose about $100 million on the deal. That would be us. The money on the closing table at the sale from the Myers family to DGI was $47.1 million wired from Lamar Savings. This is an Austin savings and loan that had a special interest rate deposit deal with Mario Rendo, the mobster from the Northeast. He had lent $46 million to Aiden Khashoggi, the weapons dealer. Aiden Khashoggi had lent $30 million to George Aubin and J.B. Harrelson on a Houston track that made several big loans to Joe Russo. That was heavily involved in the Robert Strauss's son, Ricky, in that deal, who had also made deals with Mansour Harani. Lamar was owned by Stanley Adams. He was a very eccentric man. And let's see. During interviews with the author, Adams implied and indicated that there were larger forces and figures than his control of Lamar, but he was too afraid to say who they were. Adams would later plead guilty to fraud at Lamar and was sentenced to a short prison term. Most of Lamar money on Meyerland, a little over $40 million, went to Barbados. About $30 million of that came back to the Meyer family. This figure is the approximate sell of the $35 million less a $4 million first mortgage to Connecticut General Life Insurance, which was paid off out of the Lamar money. That means that Barbados made a pure profit of $10 million in one day for signing a few papers. Barbados is an Isle of Jersey company whose principles are the same as those of the Compendium Trust, the umbrella trust company tied to John Dick that Lawrence Freeman used to launder Jack DeVoe's drug profits through. During this time, the principals and directors of Compendium were Raymond Sidney Harvey, Richard Harvey, John Wadman, and Leslie Morgan, all of whom worked together at Compendium Trust on the Isle of Jersey. The registered principals for Barbados were Harvey, the Compendium Trust, and a secretary that was also at Compendium Trust. The day that trusts are set up within Compendium Trust, the real or beneficial owners are usually different from the principals who are really behind it. They serve merely as frontmen. For example, the Isle of Jersey Trust that Freeman set up for Jack DeVos, which had names like Kathmandu and Himalaya, were registered under Freeman and his imaginary Dr. Robert Oka, but DeVoe was the beneficiary. In the case of Barbados, the owners were allegedly the Arabs whom Atkinson was representing, such as Ahmad al-Babtin, but there was nothing on the record that showed who the beneficial owner of Barbados was. Raymond Harvey was the principal whom both Lawrence Freeman and Atkinson's representatives dealt with on the Isle of Jersey. A Florida Department of Law Enforcement report states that Harvey, as well as most of the Compendium Trust officials, had previously worked at the Bank of Nova Scotia in the Bahamas before going to the Isle of Jersey in the 1970s. The Nassau branch of the Bank of Nova Scotia, a Canadian bank, was hit with a $1.25 million contempt fine in U.S. courts for failing to produce documents in a criminal case. And as reported by Jonathan Kitney, the infamous CIA-connected Nugent Hand Bank was incorporated in 1979 in the Cayman Islands by a Cayman lawyer for the Bank of Nova Scotia, showing how they're all tied together. There is speculation that Nugent Hand Bank was a successor to Castle Bank after Paul Helliwell died. And that came up in the book on BCCI that we've already done. Some federal investigators who have followed the use of the Isle of Jersey companies to launder and hide money believe that the Isle of Jersey operation was also set up in the aftermath of Castle Bank to move business there. There exists evidence in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement documents that Freeman, the former in-house counsel at Castle Bank, was in on the ground floor of the Compendium Trust. A letter dated December 31st, 1981 to Freeman from Raymond Harvey asked about fees, procedures, and documentation used by the Compendium Trust when setting up the corporations for clients in the Channel Islands, Cayman Islands, UK, and Liberia. Another entry in the Florida Law Enforcement Report on Freeman and DeVos says, quote, on January 21st, 1983, Harvey initiated a discussion via teletype about a group of Europeans joining U.S. citizens in a real estate purchase and development in Texas. Harvey was asking for advice on what corporate vehicle should be used to shield all of the parties. Freeman replied by sending some U.S. statutes relating to joint ventures and royalties. Unquote. It is not known whether this development is the Meyerland Shopping Center, but it definitely coincided with that deal. And the next event in the Meyerland saga occurred in December 1984, when the Isle of Jersey Company filed a $30 million mortgage against the western half of the shopping center. The company, Sanson Financial Consultants Limited, had the same directors as Barbados and the Compendium Trust. Sanson's attorney, Keith Allen Cox, a London solicitor, indicated in a deposition that he gave during Atkinson's bankruptcy, that Al Bobton was one of the owners of Sanson. Cox also stated that by the time Sanson got involved in the St. Joe Paper Company deal in Florida, Al Bobden was no longer a Sanson owner. The Sanson $30 million mortgage was apparently bogus. Sanson did not pay any money to DGI. The mortgage was filed in December to secure a $30 million promissory note Atkins had allegedly signed in January. But that meant that for almost 12 months, Sanson's mortgage was unprotected against any claim. Atkinson could have borrowed more money against the property during that time and would have had a superior note to the mortgage that was filed later. Cox stated in his Atkinson bankruptcy deposition that he had made a mistake in not filing the mortgage sooner. However, attorneys at Continental Savings said during their later litigation with Atkinson that their experts had determined the promissory notes Atkinson signed were made of paper that had been manufactured between 86 and 87, at least 2 years after he allegedly signed them, meaning they were bogus. The purpose of the Sanson mortgage soon became apparent: to transfer more money from the Texas Savings and Loans to the Isle of Jersey. In early 85, Michener's Allied Bank and Southmark San Joaquino Savings each filed a $5 million mortgage against the western half of the shopping center. Sanson subordinated its mortgage to them, which, of course, had it been real, there would have been no reason to do that. That indicated to them that the money the two institutions lent to DGI was actually sent to Sanson. Next, in January 86, Carol Kelly's Continental Savings made a $25 million loan to DGI secured by a mortgage on the same half of the shopping center. This loan was a wraparound loan, a second mortgage, and included the $5 million Allied Bank's first mortgage. No one seems to know what happened to San Joaquino's savings mortgage. No release was ever filed. Yet the Continental mortgage made no mention of it. This means that some lawyer involved in the deal was at least negligent, if not fraudulent. In making the loan, Continental paid DGI $20 million. The $25 million face amount of the mortgage, less a $5 million first mortgage. Approximately $10 million of this went to Sansin as partial payment on its bogus $30 million note. The other $10,000 was paid back to Continental to buy bad loans so that the Continental books look better. They're just literally moving money around to stay under the radar in the forms of these loans so that they don't get caught, which they all did. In this case, $1 million went to pay the interest on the Continental loan that they hadn't been paying to Harry Terry, Carol Kelly's Kappa Sigma brother, who was serving as a frontman for Kelly and Beebe, the mobster, on San Joaquino property they wanted to make into a horse racing track. Most of the remaining trash money went to DGI to buy bad loans from Continental that were made to John Riddle that he wasn't paying on. In June 1986, the $5 million Allied loan to DGI was sold by Allied to West Belt National Bank in Houston. This is the Houston bank that had been chartered in '83 by Robert Clark, an agent and attorney for the original investors, who would go on to be named in the U.S. Comptroller of the Currency in 1985. West Belt stockholders included Atkinson and E. Trine Starnes Jr. Atkinson's name does not appear on West Belt's charter papers. Sometime in '83, he became a minority stakeholder in the bank with a 4% purchase of stock. It was listed on his financial statement as being worth $100,000. He was later named to the bank's board of directors. One of the original stockholders in the bank was Starnes. He had been introduced. He had been a private donor to the Contras and a major borrower at Continental Savings and Silverado Savings in Denver. Then in March of '86, Robert Corson's Vision Bank Savings bought the $5 million Allied note from West Belt National Bank. This was one of the very first transactions Corson did after he got control of the savings and loan. In fact, he hadn't even changed its name. Continental Savings later bought this note from Corson for $5 million plus $1.2 million in interest that again had not been being paid. They just keep inflating the loans that they're not paying and switching banks. Finally, another $60 million in mortgages were filed against other property in the Meyerland sale. This consisted of a strip shopping center across the street and other tracts in the area. These mortgages included $12 million from Sansin. Loan closing documents show that at least almost $5 million was wired to Sansin from Delta Savings, a fraud bank in savings and loan in Albin, Texas, which is close to Houston. This means that between $30 million and $40 million went to the Isle of Jersey companies in the Meyerland transaction. The private attorney hired by Continental Savings to go after Atkinson and the money was Tom Anderson, Walter Michener's close personal friend and attorney. Anderson, of course, vowed publicly to pursue Atkinson and his money to the ends of the earth. However, the only money Anderson recovered was his fee being paid by Continental. Because he's not going to find any money if his best buddy is Michker, because Michker's in the middle of all of this. The savings and loans sued for the money, but they lost. excuse me, that they had lost. Atkinson filed for bankruptcy and claimed to be broke. Nevertheless, these lawsuits were just farces designed to conceal the fact that the savings and loans were in on it, and Atkinson was as well from the beginning. The proof of this was these lawsuits have not recovered one dime for the taxpayers, but they did charge enormous fees for the attorneys involved. At one hearing in the case before U.S. District Judge John Singleton, who years later narrowly escaped getting tied into the Sharpstown scandal, during the middle of the court hearing, Tom Alexander reminded the judge that they had played golf together just the day before. Not surprisingly, when Singleton retired in 92, he became counselor to Anderson's law firm. Anderson tried to portray the case as a money laundering scheme in which the money eventually was funneled back to Atkinson and to Robert Collins, his attorney. Other than 1 or 2% they got for fronting the paper deal, there's little evidence of that. And they knew it. It was a sham. The money was not being laundered. Its source was known as the S&Ls, and thus ultimately the taxpayers. It was just being stolen and taken offshore, which we call laundering. No one involved in the Meyerland deal had been indicted. Lamar and Continental Savings, and ultimately their federal receivers, when they failed, eventually foreclosed on DGI loans and took the property back. Lamar's successor auctioned off the eastern half of the shopping center for $18 million, which means the taxpayer took a bath for $30 million. Meanwhile, all the grandiose plans Atkinson had announced for the shopping center came to nothing. In fact, he let the strategically located center deteriorate. His company cut down all of the trees and even closed the public restrooms before being forced by the city to keep them open. He and his minions tried to run renters off and threatened to cancel leases for some of the best stores there. They really hurt a lot of people. This was simply more evidence that the whole scheme was just a scam to take money from Texas banks and savings and loans that had connections to mobsters and CIA to the Isle of Jersey for whoever was going to use it. After Atkinson closed on the Meyerland deal, his stock and his lifestyle soared. His company bought 3 airplanes, including 1 jet. One was a Lockheed Jetstar that DGI acquired from Hughes Tool Company in March of 1984. In 1987, that same plane was sold to Aero Centers in Laredo for export to Mexico. Another plane was purchased in 85 with a $1 million loan from Westbelt National Bank. Atkinson's airplanes were constantly flying south of the border. One destination just coincidentally happened to be Belize. Haley said that they looked at some land in Belize to purchase 16,000 acres. Another frequent destination was Panama, where Atkinson had a company called Panamanian International Oil Company. No one seems to know what the company did, because it doesn't appear they did any business. But it had been loaned $10 million from San Joaquino Savings. Atkinson also formed an airplane company called Skyway Aviation and hired a couple of pilots. According to Haley, Beebe was one of the powers behind that company. Atkinson was brought in as a patsy. In the case of Skyways, in case Skyway was ever caught with packages going back and forth, meaning drugs or weapons. Perhaps that's why Joe Cage shuttled Atkinson off to a drug task force attorney when he showed up in Shreveport to talk to Beebe. In 84, Atkinson bought a yacht and named it after himself and his girlfriend. They called it Mika for Michael and Kathy. It was later repossessed by San Joaquino Savings. Atkinson began taking hunting trips to Mexico, where he was accompanied by bankers from Westbelt National Bank and San Joaquino Bank. Haley and Atkinson loved to indulge in high-stake poker games on his trips to Mexico. In the summer of '86, Atkinson went with Riddle and Corson on vacation to Moonlight Beach Club in Encinitas, California, which had been created by Vernon Savings' Don Dixon. Dixon got some financing from Sandia Savings in Albuquerque for the club and would suggest to Vernon borrowers that they buy memberships in the club. Riddle, of course, was a big borrower at Vernon. Sometime between '81 and '82, Atkinson met up with Mel Powers, one of the most notorious and disreputable characters in Houston. In '66, Powers was tried and acquitted along with his aunt, Candace Mosler, for strangling and stabbing death of his uncle and her husband. He was a mob-connected financier. So, a mafia family. The allegations were that Power, then 24, and Candace were carrying on an affair and killed the uncle in his King Biscayne apartment for his money. Mosler later filed an aggravated assault charge against Powers, but she never appeared in court to press it. She and Powers then announced they were in love. But several years afterwards, Mosler married an electrical contractor, divorced him 4 years later, and then died of a drug overdose in Miami. She was buried beside her former husband in Arlington National Cemetery. That's crazy. Power started out in the mobile home business in Houston. According to an investigator who worked on organized crime with the FBI, Powers received his initial financing from a New York company associated with the mob. A lawsuit filed in federal court in Houston in '84 by one of Powers' creditors stated that he was under investigation by Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, but he never got charged. Instead, he turned into a wealthy developer in Houston, like everybody that works for the CIA, apparently. He purchased a multi-million-dollar mansion on Clear Lake with a helicopter pad and a 166-foot yacht. It was the largest privately owned yacht in the Western Hemisphere when he bought it. In 1984, Powers filed bankruptcy. At one point in his bankruptcy proceedings, he was jailed for refusing to account for $2 million in revenue generated by an office building he lost to foreclosure. Powers' most notable development was Arena Tower office and entertainment complex in Southwest Houston. He lived in the penthouse at the top of one. Evidently, it had 2 towers. And during his bankruptcy, tried to exempt the entire building in the foreclosure, saying the entire thing was his homestead. When Powers first began getting into financial problems in early 1980s, his buddy, Mike Atkinson, moved his companies to the Arena Tower to pay rent and help the cash flow. Powers' largest tenant in the office building was General Homes, the former bankrupt home builder that was partly owned by American Savings and Loan in Miami. And that did around $100 million worth of land deals with Robert Corson, i.e. the CIA. According to several people close to Corson and Powers, Walter Michener flew with B.J. Garman, Corson's mother, and Powers in Powers' aircraft to Belize in 1987. Michener and Powers would fly into the airstrip occasionally for different jaunts, but he denied going on any airplane trip to Belize with Garman and Powers, meaning Michener, because he said he didn't do anything. Although there were several people that have said that was true. U.S. Customs Service denied Freedom of Information Act requests by the author to track them. Isn't that weird? Because they're CIA. After Powers declared bankruptcy, leaving numerous creditors holding the bag for millions of unpaid obligations, he showed up in 1990 in the savings and loan mess, along with his partners, Gail Schroeder and Schroeder's son. Powers purchased $125 million in mobile home loans from a group of Texas savings and loan, then went broke. They were all taken over by the feds. According to a person that had knowledge of the deal, Powers and Schroeder's cleared $10 million in the transaction as upfront money. Schroeder is a Baytown, Texas banker who borrowed heavily from Continental Savings. Continental's federal receiver won a $1.5 million judgment against Schroeder for his unpaid 1985 loan. Century Savings and Loan also received a judgment against Schroeder for $2.6 million. Yet, despite all of their financial problems, Powers and Schroeder were able to garner a very lucrative contract with a savings and loan that had been taken over by the feds in the bankruptcy plan. How's that happen? How does that happen? When Powers moved out of his Clear Lake mansion and into the penthouse at the Arena Tower in 82, he put the mansion on the market. Atkinson shopped it with his Arab investors and partners, eventually selling it to the guy that was one of the officers in the Isle of Jersey, Al Babton. The newspaper said the sale price was $1.5 million. But Mary Faza, the Kuwaiti who introduced Atkinson to the Arabs, said Atkinson charged Al Babton $5 million for the house and some other properties, cheating the Kuwaiti out of several million dollars. When Faza said Al Babton was unable to enjoy his new mansion because he couldn't leave Kuwait for some reason. So Atkinson just helped himself to the house. Just go squat in it. We know the guy's not going to come because he can't leave Kuwait. In 1983, Atkinson found himself another house located on a 7.5 acre plantation subdivision outside of Richmond, Texas, about 20 miles from Houston. Atkinson had one of his companies buy the property from the CEO of San Joaquino Savings, and then Michener's Allied Bank lent him $300,000 on the property, while Texas Commerce had a $200,000 loan and San Joaquino gave him $50,000. In 87, San Joaquino increased the loan amount from $50,000 to $280,000. In an inspection of the property in 88, found large locked electronic controlled gates with television cameras installed for security. In addition, according to one of Atkinson's former employees, pressure plates had been buried on the ground to detect intruders. What were they doing? That's a lot of security for a house. Horses grazed in pens behind the house, and beside the house was a long black trailer with Watkins Racing Team on the side. It turned out to be a stock car racing group out of Jackson, Mississippi. Atkinson's house is on a dead-end road. At the other end is the house of a subdivision developer by the name of J. Bruce Boleyn Jr. He was a successful residential developer and recreation builder. He was president of American Land Development Association in the late 70s. A Salt Lake City company that sold timeshare vacation condos at April Sound in the 80s was sued by the Texas Attorney General for alleged deceptive trade practices by making false presentations to customers to get them to buy timeshares. The company Sweetwater agreed to make restitution to some of their customers. A director of Sweetwater was Chicago attorney Burton Cantor, another mobster lawyer. In a letter to the author, Canton stated, as for the participation in any deceptive trade practices, I certainly did not personally engage in any practices at any time. And of course not, because they have people they pay to do that. So they can say that. Another interesting connection is that Bruce Boleyn's father was the first cousin of Jake Boleyn, the head of the St. Joe Paper Company. When questioned about their relationship, Bruce said that he had never met Jake, but had talked to him on the phone, and then later admitted that he had met him. He just hadn't seen him recently. When told about Atkinson living down the street from his cousin, Jake replied, I'm not aware that Bruce was Atkinson's neighbor. When asked about Atkinson, he said, no, I don't know Mr. Atkinson at all. I never met him. I knew he was living down there somewhere. I just didn't know where. Perhaps it's a coincidence that Atkinson moved into a house previously owned by the San Joaquino Savings executive with a San Joaquino mortgage on it, close to Bruce Boleyn, whose latest Houston development was also financed by San Joaquino Savings, and less than 2 years later was negotiating with San Joaquino's parent company, Southmark, to buy 21,000 acres from Jake Boleyn in Florida. Perhaps it's another coincidence that Larry Freeman was also working with Atkinson to buy the land from Jake, while Freeman's good friend and business associate, Burton Cantor, was the director of a company doing business with Bruce. One big happy family. It certainly appears that Atkinson was introduced to Jake Boleyn either through Bruce Boleyn or San Joaquino Savings. But Jake said he didn't meet Mike Atkinson until 1985, when Atkinson was interested in buying the 21,000 acres from St. Joe Paper Company. The official story that a couple of real estate brokers put Atkinson and Boleyn together and the two Florida panhandlers hit it off. The first document regarding the sale, a land purchase contract, was signed in October 1985 by W.L. Thornton, president of St. Joe Paper Company, as the seller, and by Michael Beauvoir Wagner, president of the Panhandle Coast Investment, as the buyer. At that time, Beauvoir Wagner was Lawrence Freeman's office manager and legal assistant. In other words, he's fronting the deal. Freeman is the registered agent for the company, whose incorporation papers were filed in Florida one day before the contract was signed. Jake Boleyn said to the author that Freeman was supposed to be representing Atkins in some manner. Atkinson's accountant said the company, Panhandle Coast Investment, was just a front for the Isle of Jersey boys. Raymond Harvey and Keith Allen Cox, those are the two Isle of Jersey boys, to create an artificial $20 million debt to them from Atkinson. Florida corporation records show that in 1988, the only officer and director listed was Martin Clitheroe, who was the London law partner of Cox from the Isle of Jersey. The purchase contract provided that Panhandle Coast Investments would assign its rights to a joint venture of DGI and Southmark, meaning the mob. This assignment was made less than a week later, and not a moment too soon. The following month, Freeman, who notarized Beauvoir Wagner's signature on the assignment, was indicted for laundering Jack DeVoe's drug money. Southmark had lined up its subsidiary, San Joaquino Savings, to provide the financing on the sale. However, by the next month, the federal regulatory authorities had stopped Southmark from getting any more financing for any deals, including that from San Joaquino. It was about $1 billion too late for taxpayers, so now Atkinson had to scramble to find new money. The first savings and loan that stepped up was Jarrett Wood's Western Savings. A February 86 letter from Western Savings to one of Atkinson's attorneys discussed a loan of $86 million on the Florida track, but Western dropped out too. The next savings and loan was Hill Financial in Red Hill, Pennsylvania. The savings and loan that had already lent almost $200 million to Denver developer and Herman Beebe associate Richard Rossmiller and his partner, including Robert Anderson. Hill Financial was reportedly brought into the deal by W.A. Andy Erskine, a loan broker who had worked at Delta Savings, one of Meyerland's lenders. Erskine is the son-in-law of the former mayor of Albin, who was a business associate of Continental Savings, Carol Kelly. The broker involved on Hill's side was David Devaney. He used to work at Sunrise Savings in Boynton Beach, Florida. So it's all the same people, just a different bank. Then two entities came forward announcing their intentions to pay a $30 million takeout commitment to Hill Financial. A takeout commitment, Beebe's standard way of guaranteeing a bank loan for an associate to buy a savings and loan, means that they would guarantee $30 million of the Hill loan and actually pay Hill off and take over the mortgage at a certain time in the future. So it's really Beebe that's behind all of this, the mobster. In April 86, Richard Dover wrote to Hill about a $30 million takeout. Dover was John Riddle's real estate partner, who was later convicted of tax fraud. Then in May, Bank Plus Savings Associate in Pasadena, Texas, wrote to Atkinson proposing a $30 million takeout commitment as well. In addition, Bank Plus owner Kenneth Snitzer would buy a parcel of the Florida land for $15 million, which is the same prominent Houston developer who hung out at the country club, who was founded by Houston undercover police allegedly associating with Carlos Marcello, and that had built the Allied Bank building in downtown Houston for Michener. So CIA and mobster. Former employees of Schnitzker included H. Stephen Grace, the mainland borrower involved with Ian Paget Brown. Schnitzker had purchased Southmore Savings from another Michener associate and business partner, Tommy Atkins, and then changed its name to Bank Plus. When Schnitzker fell on hard times, he sold his Century Development Company to Bank Plus for $60 million. And then when the company and the S&L went broke, he tried to buy it back for $12 million. What a great deal. Give me 60 and I'll give you back 12. Regarding the $60 million in cash that Bank Plus paid for Century Development, Schnitzker told the Houston Post, "Neither I nor anyone in my family received so much as a penny from the assets sold. All of the proceeds on the cash sale were used to pay debts on the remaining assets owed by Century Corp." In a letter to the author, Schnitzker said the cash payments were made to a number of banks and financial institutions. He stated that other alternatives would have been to sell some of those assets to third parties. In other words, Schnitzker would have lost control over the assets of his company. According to federal investigators, Schnitzker flew out to Florida, looked at the land, and met Atkins and the governor of Florida. That's weird. Why would the governor of Florida be involved in it? But the Bank Plus deal fell through too. Schnitzker said he didn't go through with the transaction because he didn't feel comfortable with it. Atkinson and the boys still wanted to come up with another $20 million to $30 million in addition to Hill's financial $70 million. By this time, Robert Corson had purchased his savings and loan in South Texas, so it was used to loan $20 million to the deal, even though the assets of the savings and loan total was $70 million. And then they defrauded the bank by cutting up the 20 million to make it look like there were 5 separate loans of 4 million each. Everything was set. On June 5th, 1986, Atkinson's company bought 2,850 acres of beachfront and 18,000 acres of inland property from St. Joe Paper Company for a total of $200 million, $70 million in cash from Hill Financial and Vision Bank Savings, and $130 million in promissory notes from Atkins Company. It was the most expensive land deal in Florida history, approximately 37 times what Disney paid for his land in Orlando that Paul Helliwell did for him. All other developers who looked at the deal said they couldn't believe it. There was no way in the world the property was worth that much money, which is about the same thing the developers had said about the Meyerland sale. This deal is not even marginal, said the vice president of a research company when asked about it by Florida Trend. Quote, the only way it would work is if turpentine yielded from the trees on the property became the hottest product in the futures market in the history of the country. Outrageous for, he called it outrageous. The grandiose plan for the development again came to nothing, but every participant in the deal walked away with money, land, or both. The only losers were the American taxpayers, who probably lost about $100 million in cash paid out by the two savings and loans. DuPont St. Joe Paper Company came out as the biggest winner. At the sale closing, the company got $62 million in cash from Hill Financial, plus $5 million in cash from Corson's Vision Bank Savings. Hill also put $7 million into an interest reserve account. Atkinson's company defaulted on the interest payment due, and Hill paid the $7 million to St. Joe and then lent Atkinson's for $12 million so he could make his interest payments. You know, because that's just the thing you do. In every one of these stories, they have no intentions of paying for the loans and the interest. So they just keep borrowing money in a different bank. So the next year, Atkinson defaulted on the very first principal payment due. So what happened? St. Joe Paper Company foreclosed on the 1,800 acres of beachfront property that it had mortgaged and had a promissory note on. So they got the property back. St. Joe Paper Company ended up with about $86 million in cash plus their land back. So is this money laundering? This acreage accounted for 60% of the value of the original $200 million deal. Taxpayers might be able to stomach this if the money went to the Nemore Foundation that helped the crippled children in Texas, but none of it did. In 1986, according to the annual report, St. Joe Paper recorded a company-wide profit of $100 million, which included $71 million from the sale of the property. This means that 70% of its profit came from the land deal. Then, out of the total profits, it paid a dividend of $5 million to the stockholders, including $10 a share in cash and 53 cents a share in stock of the St. Joe Limited Partnership. Since the Alfred DuPont Testamentary Trust owned about 80% of the St. Joe shares, in 1986, it received approximately $700,000 in cash and $3.7 million in partnership stock, taking 70% of that yield a final figure of $3 million. $3 million, that's how much the trust got from the land deal to pass on to the Foundation for Crippled Children. And less than $500,000 of that was actually in cash. Where did most of the money go? Well, according to St. Joe's annual report, it kept it. In 86, about half of the company's profit went for additions to plant, property, and equipment. The rest went for reduction of long term debt and purchase of certificates of deposits and mutual bonds. In the 87 annual report, the company stated the company has approved a very aggressive capital expenditure budget over the next several years. The budget for this year and next year includes $7 million in timberland operations, approximately $100 million for the mill, and almost $15 million for the container company. Ed Ball, who had been proud, Ed Ball would have been proud. Jake Belen was building up the assets of the company, but he was doing it at the expense of the American taxpayers and the beneficiaries of the Nemore Foundation. What about the rest of the $100 million in the deal? About $15 million of that came from Corson Savings and Loan. Who got it? Sanson Financial Consultants of the Isle of Jersey got almost half of Vision Blanc's money, $7 million. Sanson also got 260 acres of some of the best beachfront property in the deal, meaning the CIA Mafia. That alone was valued at about almost $17 million. This money and land came from another one of the bogus debt deals, in which Sanson claimed that Atkins owed it $20 million. There was no evidence of the debt. Sanson apparently got $7 million in cash and the 260 acres for nothing. The $7 million does not appear on any of the loan closing documents. The only payment to Sanson on those documents is almost $1 million. However, thanks to the efforts and determination of a single federal regulator, Ken Curtin, who got the assignment to examine Vision Bank savings, we know that what happened to the other $6.1 million. The $6.1 million started out as a single payment to Plantech Realty Corporation, a subsidiary of Florida's largest engineering firm, Reynolds, Smith and Hills. That was assisting DGI in the development plans. Reynolds, Smith and Hills also had done work for St. Joe Paper Company. Plantech got an additional $3 million and two other payments out of the closing. Plantech then signed over a $6.1 million check to Ben Koshkin, one of Atkinson's associates and sometimes partner. Mary Faza said that Koshkin was with Atkinson back in 81 when he was first getting started. Koshkin deposited the check in his account at West Belt National and then wrote a $6.1 million check the same day to Sanson. One Houston attorney familiar with the case said that check originally bounced because the bank hadn't yet been credited. The attorney also said Koshkin received for his services about $30,000. The Isle of Jersey company then started sending out money in big chunks. It wired $1.5 million to Bank Cantrade, Switzerland, and put $1.8 million in a CD at Westbelt, which was pledged to a commercial loan. Sanson also transferred $1 million to DGI and $600,000 to Atkins attorney Robert Collins. The documents showing these transfers was placed into evidence in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals during the federal home loan investigation. The federal judge in Houston, Lynn Hughes, refused to allow the feds further access to Sanson's records at West Belt National because they were actually tracing the money from a CIA-controlled Isle of Jersey account into the bank accounts of Americans. So you can't see that. Sorry. Hughes made his ruling without hearing arguments from the federal regulators. His decision was later overturned on appeal. Corson himself got $3 million in cash out of the deal, plus a 23-acre tract on the beach. plus a Ferrari and some townhouses in Houston. So everybody got rich but us. On the date of the sale, the 23-acre tract was sold 3 times. It was sold 3 times, the value jumping from less than 1.5 million to 20 million. So they're just, you sign this document, you sign this document, you sign this document. And every single time the document was signed, it jumped up in price, up to 20 million. The property was transferred from St. Joe Company to an Atkins company to Corson, and then to another Atkinson, and then back to Corson. So Corson ended up with it. In the last transaction, Corson got the $3 million in cash plus a $17 million promissory note. Atkinson's company defaulted on the note, of course, and Corson took the land back and then pledged it against a $7 million loan at M-Bank Houston that he used to buy Vision Bank savings. Keep in mind, Corson is CIA. Also making out on the deal was John Riddle, who had used a $3 million promissory note that Corson received to pay off a loan from Vernon Savings. From Riddle, Corson got the townhouses and the Ferrari, which had belonged to Vernon Savings. This came about because of a related deal involving a swap of 2 pieces of property in Houston for some of the Florida land that Atkinson got. Vision Bank lost several $million on this swap deal because it had a second mortgage on some of the property north of Houston. And then the savings and loan lost it all when the first mortgage holder foreclosed. But that loss was not nearly as much as Vision lost on the Florida land deal. The $20 million loan was secured by 4 mortgages on 4 pieces of property totaling 107 acres. The 4 companies buying the property were fronts for Atkinson and Corson. One of the straw borrowers for Corson was Robert Ferguson, the Kappa Sigma buddy, who had said in a deposition in his divorce that he got $100,000 for his time in fronting Corson on the deal. All of the borrowers defaulted on their loans, and Vision Bank Savings foreclosed and repossessed the land, then estimated to be worth about $3 million of the $20 million that they had loaned. That left Vision with a loss of $17 million. And that's what basically bankrupted that bank. What happened to the money that was taken offshore, including the $30 million to $40 million from the Maryland deal? One theory holds that the money taken offshore was used to buy war supplies for Iraq. The evidence for this is circumstantial and includes the following. Before the deal, Atkinson was allegedly running guns to Iraq with some of the Kuwaitis and Saudis, who were also on the books as agents for the companies in the Isle of Jersey. One of the banks where some of the proceeds from the Texas savings and loan were deposited was a Isle of Jersey branch of the Swiss bank. It was a subsidiary of UBS. The subsidiary is one of the banks that the CIA used to launder money for arms purchases, according to Robert Maxwell, a former Maryland banker, who worked on moving money around for the CIA front Associated Traders. Maxwell, who was an officer at First National Bank of Maryland, has alleged that he was told by an official at Associated Traders in December of '84 to transfer approximately $5.4 million to the UBS subsidiary. The money went from a CIA account in the Cayman Islands to a bank in Panama, and then to UBS, and then to the Isle of Jersey's subsidiary of UBS. Maxwell filed a $4 million lawsuit against First National Bank of Maryland, Associated Traders, and the CIA after he asked to stop working on Associated Traders' account and requested written authorization for his money-moving activities, fearing they might be illegal. Maxwell never got his written authorization and claimed he was intimidated and threatened. The UBS subsidiary on the Isle of Jersey was also used by Lawrence Freeman for the deposit of some of Jack DeVoe's drug money. Some of DeVoe's legal fees paid by Harvey Sillett, the tax attorney in Chicago, who was also representing Burton Cantner, came from this account on the Isle of Jersey, according to Florida investigators. A former Israeli intelligence officer, Ari Ben Beneshe, has alleged that John Riddle and one of his companies, First Western Aviation, were part of the arms to Iran operation that worked out of Arizona. According to him, in late 85, First Western began shipping arms to Iraq as well. The Reagan-Bush administration were seriously considering sending arms to Iraq during Iran-Iraq war to try to balance out their arms for hostage deals. Mixed into the middle of all of this were bogus notes payable to various Channel Island companies, were invoices for 100 Volvo trucks valued at almost $11 million. The bill of exchange relating to these trucks involved a substantial Kuwaiti company that would not have needed the assistance of Atkinson in procuring financing for its business operations. But they were money laundering. Investigators looking into the BCCI scandal have found instances where weapons were purchased using fake invoices for trucks. For example, the respected congressional newsletter Roll Call reported that in 1985, there were documents that showed BCCI providing almost $10 million for a letter of credit for sales that were actually for U.S.-made tow missiles. The invoice by the seller, a British company, accurately described the weapons, but the BCCI letter of credit describes them as lift trucks. On January 23, 1992, Roll Call reported that BCCI's letters of credit indicated the bank officials may have known the trucks were actually weapons and participated in disguising them because the letter indicates they were in possession of the invoice, the real one. The letter makes reference to the invoice but describes the missiles as lift trucks. Now, for those of you who's not been with us for a long time, BCCI was notorious for doing this. They would get the invoices. It wasn't just a bank. And by the way, the bank was headquartered in London at this point. So they're just forging, they get the real invoices of what it really is. And then they make up invoices. So when they're doing the money transfers, if anybody ever goes back and looks at it, it looks like it's for regular stuff when in fact it was all weapons trafficking. In a recent investigation into Banco Nacional de Laboro in Atlanta, which was a front bank for BCCI, the Atlanta bank had lent $4 billion to Iraq, some of which was backed by U.S. credit and may have been used for weapons. It was learned that Volvo trucks were used as a code word for Scud missiles. The Scud missiles that were shooting at our aircraft in 1991 were being funded by American banks. The author says this: although these weapons were supposed to be used by Iraq in its war against Iran, the irony of American taxpayer dollars being siphoned out of Texas savings and loan by mob associates and CIA operatives were being used to buy weapons for Iraq that would turn around and be used on us in the Gulf War. And that is a fact. Another interesting relationship in the Florida land deal involves the attorneys for Corson's Savings and Loan, the Houston law firm of Lakshan and Nathan. This law firm also represented Continental Savings, and one of its partners, Marvin Nathan, served on the board of directors at Continental. This is a curious fact because Atkinson never made a payment on his Continental loan for Meyerland that he got in January of '86. Then in June, Continental's law firm was representing Vision, funneling money to Atkinson and his fronts. Didn't they know that Atkinson was in default of his Continental loan? Why did they allow Vision to continue lending him money? Marvin Nathan said he did not work on the Vision loan and was not aware that Continental Loan was in default, which is bullshit because you have to pull history. Gordon appeared to have been a possible conflict of interest in handling the Atkins loan anyway. Gordon was a registered agent for Houston's International Securities Corporation, which was incorporated in Texas in 82 and forfeited its charter in 85. In his 82 divorce, Atkinson showed that he owned the company. The president was his partner, Ben Koshkin. Gordon said he had asked Koshkin, a client at his firm, to incorporate the company. I didn't know if I knew about Atkinson's role, he said. There were other connections between the law firm and Robert Corson. In the 80s, Marvin Nathan was a trustee in a complicated land deal involving Corson and his partner, Sandy Aaron. One of Aaron's clients, Emily Todd, sued Aaron and Corson over the deal, claiming that they used Nathan as a trustee to buy a piece of property at a low price and then sell it to her at a higher price. They routinely did that. Although Nathan's partner, Herbert Lakshin, represented Corson's mother, B.J. Garman, in her 1985 divorce from William Garman, between the time that Nathan was representing Corson and Aaron in the disputed land deal and the time his partner was representing BJ in the divorce, Nathan and his brother-in-law, Neil Strauss, who was related to Robert Strauss, the U.S. ambassador to Moscow, because of course, participated in a land purchase. They bought a 1,185-acre ranch northwest of Houston from the family of, wait for it, Nicaraguan dictator and Anastasio Somoza. The guy the Sandinistas overthrew. That all of this shit's about, supplying money for the Contras. They're buying his big land estate. And why would this guy be in the United States? Because he was sponsored here by the CIA. He had killed tens of thousands of his own people. He was responsible for the death of a whole bunch of people in the Catholic Church. This guy is an evil bastard. And he had a 1,100-acre ranch in Texas, because of course he did. The Somozas family consisted of nephews and cousins and purchased the ranch in September 77 from William Stamp Farish III. Who's that? Farish was the grandson of the founder of Exxon. He was also one of George Bush's closest friends and handled Bush's blind trust investments. So let's put this in perspective. George Bush, Mr. CIA, had one of his friends sell his deposed dictator in Nicaragua a ranch in Texas, right outside of Houston, where George Bush goes all the time. And then George Bush goes on to create Contras, funds them, sends them weapons, brings drugs in so that they could reinstall Somoza back in Nicaragua. That's freaking crazy. Yeah. The purchase of the ranch by the Somozas occurred about the time the Sandinistas were stepping up the pressure on Somoza. Seeing the writing on the wall, the wealthy Nicaraguans began moving their money to the U.S. with the help of George Bush. 6 years later, in 1983, about the same time the private assistance to the Contra was cranking up, the Somozas sold the ranch to Nathan and Strauss. Nathan said it was absurd to believe that any of the money from the Somozas' sale of the ranch went to the Contras. What? I'd be willing to bet it did. All right, we got just 2 more pages. Before St. Joe Paper Company foreclosed on the mortgage to Atkinson's company, there had been a long legal fight between Atkinson and Hill Financial. Like the Maryland deal litigation, it was another of those smokescreens to cover up the fact that all the parties were in collusion with each other. One of Atkinson's former employees told investigators that Atkinson and his people were drawing up a lawsuit. At the same time, they were drawing up the loan documents to close the sale. After St. Joe's Paper Company foreclosed on the 1,850 acres of beachfront land, Keith Cox and Sanson, the Isle of Jersey company, that's the CIA, took over the project from Atkinson and proceeded to get into a big fight with Hill Financial over the foreclosure of 18,000 interior acres that Hill had on the mortgage. Cox kept trying to line up partners and investors, but it appeared that if he were simply going through a song and dance to convince federal authorities about the whole transaction that had been done in good faith instead of a scam with S&L money in the Isle of Jersey. One of the potential partners Cox said he was approaching was called E-Systems, the Dallas-based electronic firm and defense contractor. E-Systems had originally been part of the James Ling's LTV. In 1970, William Rayburn, CIA director from 65 to 66, had put on E-Systems board of directors, and the company was spun off LTV in 72. Rayburn stayed on the board. So, in other words, we're dealing with more CIA fronts. In 1975, E-Systems bought Asia Air. That came up many times because that's also a CIA company that did repair and maintenance in Taiwan for Air America, another CIA front. 1 year after that, the company was awarded a $16.6 million contract to install and maintain censoring devices that monitor the Sinai buffer zone between Egypt and Israel. Both President John Dixon insist, but President John Dixon insists, we never did business with the CIA. Paraphrasing, we never did it directly with the CIA. We just dealt with all the CIA front companies. That's why they have front companies, so people can say dumb shit things like that. E-System is a major supplier of electronic spying equipment for the CIA and NSA. Another company that made noises about buying the 18,000 acres out of foreclosure was a Jacksonville insurance company called Old Dominion Insurance, owned by Gary Vose, V-O-S-E, a Denver developer and sometimes partner of Richard Rossmiller, who also had his own CIA ties. Voss bought controlling interest in the Florida insurance firm from J. Edward Houston, a Fort Lauderdale attorney, judge, and banker. That's a great combination. Houston had been involved in the Florida savings and loan real estate deal with Jeb Bush. Last but not least, Roy Daly, Robert Corson's first cousin, approached Hill Financial about buying the Florida land. Daly told Hill officials that he was working with a company called Government Securities. He had a letter of credit from who? BCCI, another CIA front. For his part, Hill Financial brought in one of its borrowers, Patrick Harrison, to try to run things and get some development going. Harrison had borrowed tens of millions of dollars from Hill Financial to buy repossessed real estate in Colorado and in Texas. Evidently, he's the cleanup guy. Under the same warehouse associates, including some of the controlled by John Riddle and Richard Rossmiller. Harrison's father was Nat Harrison, a Florida construction contractor whose lawsuit against the IRS in 1964 is noted in a 1985 report by the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigating Crimes and Secrecy, the use of offshore banks and companies. The Senate report, which was worked on by Robert Corson's attorney-to-be, S. Cass Weiland, stated that Nat Harrison's company had entered into 3 contracts to construct missile facilities in the Caribbean, and then formed a Panamanian company to do the work in order to try to keep the profits offshore and untaxed. One of Nat Harrison's partners in his construction company was his father-in-law, and Pat Harrison's grandfather, Alto Adams, a former Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. Adams was also one of the 5 trustees in Victor Posner's irrevocable trust, along with Victor Posner and Armour White, the Miami businessman and father of Harold White, who was involved in Sunshine State Bank and People's Bank, which were Mafia. The Houston law firm that represented Harrison and his company, Warehouse Associates, is Stumpf and Falgott, the name partner of which T.J. Falgott III. Falgott is the cousin of Tillman Fertitta. In fact, they share the same first name, Tillman Joseph. Fertitta was previously mentioned as a relative of the Galveston Mafia family. Falgott's father, T.J. Falgott Jr., a boat company owner in Louisiana, appears in bankruptcy company papers of Commercial Helicopter, the Baton Rouge company that was financed by the Mafia, Herman Beebe, and also supplied helicopters and helicopter parts to the CIA. As Commercial Helicopters teetered on the edge of bankruptcy in '83, Falgott and his partner came in and bought the company. Their proposed purchase, though, never materialized. Finally, Cox and Sanson are now trying to swap their 260 acres for more than 300 acres of nearby land owned by the state of Florida. This swap was proposed after adverse publicity about the St. Joe Paper Company stopped the attempt by Cox to sell their land to the state of Florida, because the entire thing was a CIA Mafia front deal that passed money to DuPont's St. Joe Paper Company and to themselves. So that's it for today. Almost done. Almost done.
That's crazy. Hey, Ed Estar as co-host as well.
Sure.
He brought up some really great stuff that he posted over on the Rumble channel, and I won't steal his thunder.
Okay.
Thank you, Bridget. I appreciate that. Thank everybody here for being here, and hopefully everyone has a happy new year. We have such great people here in Rumble and in Spaces, and people provide a lot of information. So, given that, I'm still looking at Corson, and I have been all over the internet looking for a picture of this dude. There isn't one. I can't find a picture of Robert Corson, middle name Lewis, anywhere. Now, he was scheduled to go to trial. When he found out he was being indicted, he fled to Latin America. He came back. He was scheduled for trial and later found dead in a motel room.
Supposedly of a heart attack.
Supposedly of a heart attack. Yes, ma'am.
When did we get proof that we had a heart attack gun?
I have no idea.
In the mid-'70s. In the mid-'70s at the Senate.
That was the church committee.
Yeah.
There's a famous photo of Senator Church holding it.
Yes. Yeah, that was in the mid-'70s. Yeah, so they have a heart attack gun. Yeah, it's another coincidence. Yeah, another coincidence. Yeah, you can't
left and right here.
You can't testify. Yeah, you can't testify. You know too much. You've done too many of our dirty deals. You can't actually testify in a court. So, damn your luck. You're going to die of a heart attack. Sorry. And I bet I know where he went in Latin America. He probably went to Costa Rica and to John Hall's ranch. And they probably stopped off in Belize on the way down there.
That's a good assumption.
Yeah. Not like he hadn't made a few trips down there. Because Robert Corson was in on the land deal of buying that shit in Belize. Yeah, it's crazy.
Patterns and patterns and patterns and
It's absolutely crazy. All right. Anybody else got anything?
Hey, Colonel.
Yeah.
You covered, I mean, Pete Bruton obviously, visits everything here, including Paula Helliwell's Castle Bank and Burton Cantor. Burton Cantor was featured, and he probably cites Penny Lerneau's 1984 book, In Banks We Trust, for his comments on, that if he didn't get those accounts transferred, Burton Cantor would wind up face down in the Chicago River. Pete Bruton apparently must have been a little bit worried about a defamation suit, though, because he leaves out the name of the person who was referenced in that. And Burton Cantor was handling accounts, I believe, in Penny Pritzker's book. She states that those accounts were for Jay Pritzker. So it's the Pritzker family. And he also mentions the La Costa Hotel in Los Angeles that I think Cantor was involved with, and a few of these other guys mentioned here were involved with. That was funded by the Teamsters. So there's all these interesting connections. The other interesting thing, of course, is that the original money to start Hyatt House in 1963 in Los Angeles, Hyatt House Hotels, was also provided by the Teamsters pension funds.
They use them for a lot of things.
Yes. If you got money from the Teamsters pension funds, you probably had some friendly connections with the Sicilian Mafia, if it happened in the 60s or the 70s at least.
Correct.
Not necessarily a sure thing, but, it's the, Jimmy Hoffa and that pension was kind of controlled by, a certain group of people out there. So, the interesting thing is this is still relevant today because Penny Pritzker, the daughter of Jay Pritzker, number one, she was involved in a scandal with Superior Bank where she got caught holding money from the defaulted bank in her own personal account. And I think 2000, it was a big scandal with the FDIC. The same thing when it happened with Refco, people went to prison over it. She got let off the hook, and that's okay. But now she's the head. Now she became the president of Harvard at one point.
Yeah, which is another money laundering operation.
Yes. So you got Penny Pritzker over there, and then of course you also have J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. So some of this background is still relevant today.
Yes, all of it is, I think.
When you see J.B. Pritzker coming out and defending, illegal immigration and
money laundering,
undocumented refugees, and some of these other different things that are going on, there's an Operation Gladio connection that goes back to Castle Bank with the Pritzker family, as well as a couple of Teamsters funded loans out there too.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. We need to do Penny's book. I need to go get that and bring it in. I've read that book. Actually, he does at the end of his book, he has several pages of acknowledgments and mentions most of the authors in it, and I do not see her name in here.
She had passed away.
Yeah, I know.
So she would not have been able to help him. I think she died of cancer in the late 80s.
But he used a lot of people's books. Like, for example, he says that he owed a great debt of gratitude for all the research that Jonathan Kitney had done because he used a lot of Jonathan Kitney's material in this book. So I'm just going back to your point. He may have not used her because he did a very good job of
I think he cited Penny Lerneau in another citation several chapters back.
Okay.
There is a citation of her. Obviously, I think, when he's that citation that he was going to wind up face down in the Chicago River.
Yeah.
That quote came from an interview between Penny Lernoux.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I just found
in
it.
the early 80s.
All right, hold on. I found it. Let me get back to it real quick. You're right. 183. Hold on just a second. I'll get it. Let's see. That's a very good point. Let me find where he was using that. Well, where is it? I usually can go right to him because I always circle. Oh, yeah, right here. Footnote 4. Here it is. In addition to the CIA connections to world finance, there was also evidence of mafia ties. The DEA and congressional investigators found links to Santo Trafficani, the mafia boss in Florida, including a world finance employee who was a Trafficani associate. That was the first of ones. And then he also noted an affiliated company, Dominion Mortgage Corporation, which shared the same Coral Gables address and borrowed $2 million from World Finance, and that's the CIA front, by the way, to buy an office building there, worked with the Trafficani family to supply drugs to Las Vegas. Dominion Mortgage was also trying to buy the Caesars Palace Casino in Las Vegas. And then he also, let's see, it says here, where is that note again? 84. Okay. And yes, and then he goes on to say that DeVore had back shortly thereafter, apparently having spoken to Benson, meaning the senator. And DeVore stated categorically that the senator had never had any interest, but in fact he did. Yeah, those were quotes of hers. You're right.
Yeah, my only complaint about Pete Bruton's book is he has the occasional footnote here and there, but he cites his references in line.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to find the references and the footnotes or the end notes,
it's harder to find.
It's a little bit tricky to track those down.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but she is in there in a footnote, and she is referenced in the back, which is interesting because most of the authors whose material he used is in that acknowledgement area. She just isn't in that area. But anyway, we do need to do her book because that's a really, really good. We also need to do the Economic Hitman book. But I've got like the next 6 months worth of books stacked up. But we'll work them in because those are definitely, they contextualize everything that we're talking about. They give you the why they're doing this. And that's the piece that a lot of people miss. Both of those books do a good job of, because we're talking in most of our material about what they're doing and how they did it, as opposed to why they did it. And I think that's probably a good thing to do as well. Renee, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you again for all you do, Bridget, Line ISR, everybody here. I am so grateful to be part of the Colonel's Corner in this time of life and going through this journey and learning so much information, incredible information. It's very meaningful. So thank you. And I look forward to carrying on in 2026 with all of you. So happy New Year to everyone. That's
Thank you, Renee. Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks.
So let me just say this, and it's a good way kind of to close out this, to Illini's point about how relevant all of this information is. So it's just like the whole big stupid story in that Ralph Paluzzo's book that I'm going to go through with CanCon and Ash on Badlands. When they spin a story, you guys are now all educated enough to know that it's a story, it's not the story. If anyone thinks that these types of operations that we've read about in this book, that we know the CIA's behind, and the mafia, and our politicians at both parties, as this book clearly articulates, both parties. If you think that what is going on today with all of the fraud out of the federal government that is being found in predominantly blue states, as they call them, without both parties and something being kicked back to the intelligence agencies, you're smoking crack. You just are. They would never allow something that they're not part of to operate in billions of dollars inside the United States. They wouldn't. Their hand is in that somewhere. And we now have 75 years worth of evidence that proves that. If anything is going on that their hands are not in, they cut it out. That's true in competing drug networks in Mexico, in Colombia, wherever. They're taking out all of this time, not the main source that they control. They're taking out the competition. And so you literally have to be on crack if you think that all of these quote unquote refugees, where we've sourced every one of them to include Somalia, why are all those Somalians here? Well, because the CIA was in Somalia and they were doing all kinds of crazy shit. And if you go back and read the history of Somalia, you find out that, and I'm not saying they're not bad, they're bad. The terrorists that we were told, the Al-Shabaab guys, they were the ones that were fighting the CIA installed people. And that has been true, just like in Chile and Brazil and Nicaragua and everywhere. Everywhere we've been. The same thing happened in Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh and the Diem down in the South. So everywhere the CIA goes and does destabilization, it generates refugees. And in the case where, like in Nicaragua, where Somoza, their installed dictator, gets overthrown, the Nicaraguans that get displaced out of the elite that the CIA has cultivated all get brought here, just like the Somoza family did. And they don't just sit idly by waiting for the CIA to overthrow the Sandinista government. They get involved in the same nefarious shit they were involved with the CIA running drugs, as we saw in Gary Webb's book. Those Nicaraguans were in charge of the drug operations going into LA, on the South Side, in San Francisco, in Miami. They don't sit idly by. They work for the CIA inside the United States. And that's exactly what the Somalians are doing. They bring the people here and they set them up and run scams and steal our money. And Congress is part of it. You would not be sitting in Congress with the power of oversight and not know that in the last 10 years, we went from whatever the number is, and I know somebody posted it, like less than $1 billion in all of the aids going into Minnesota to going to hundreds of billions of dollars in 10 years and not go, they don't have that big of an increase in population, whether it's medical, daycare, or whatever, to warrant, 200 times the amount of money going into that one state. So everybody at every level, and we've been through multiple multi-party administrations, and it continued. So that's why everything that we have learned over the last 3 years is relevant today. they have their hands in everything. And it's both parties. It's at all levels. SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I just want to bring your point home here, because what we're seeing with, was it Shirley? That's been
the guy that
all this reporting on what's going on with childcare.
Yeah.
CNN had a panel just earlier hollering and screaming about this dude simply because he identified all this stuff, and they're sitting there saying, well, he's this, he's that, he's the other. And my reply to that is that what's really going on here is they've lost another form of money laundering.
Yep.
Because this is not about the kids. If you listen to what they're saying, it's not about the kids.
Nope.
Oh no, somebody's trying to stop this. They never say, we need to take that money and make sure it gets to the kids.
Nope.
That's not what they say.
Correct. They don't give a shit about the kids. It's a money laundering operation.
It's a money laundering operation.
And all he did, I mean, for those of you who's not following it that closely, those investigations into that fraud up there has been going on for years. There's people that's already pled guilty. There's people already sentenced. That has been going on. What that kid did was get people to talk about it. He didn't discover anything. He just reported on it. He reported on the ongoing fraud. And he did it in a way outside of the controlled Mockingbird CIA controlled narrative. And they will rain hell on him for going outside of their apparatus to do it. And that's what I find very interesting. But it should make all of us very excited about it, because they now know they cannot control the narrative anymore. No matter how they're doing it, it's going to get exposed. And with all of the people empowered with their phone in their hand to go and expose it, you are looking at a snowball that's only about 10 feet down a mountain that's about a 2-mile mountain. And as that snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it rolls down the mountain, that means more people are going to be empowered to go out and use their phone to document the fraud. And it is going to be unstoppable. And you saw that Emmers gets right out there in front of a camera going, oh my God, I can't believe this was going on in my home state, when he was part and parcel of it for the last 10 years, even having taken a trip to Somalia. There's pictures of him meeting with the Somali ambassador. He was part of it. He's a Republican. He's the number 3 guy in the House. He could have at any time in the last 10 years said, guys, we're sending too much money to my home state. There's no way this money warrants, there's not that many kids in Minnesota. But he didn't. He allowed it to go on. And I want you guys to notice their technique. As soon as they know that they're responsible for it, they're the first ones in front of a camera to go, oh my God, look at this. It's just so predictable now. You don't see everybody else getting up. Not that there wasn't fraud found in Washington. There's fraud found in California. He knows he is part and parcel of it, and he thinks he can get out in front of it. That snowball is going to take him out. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel, what do you think of, I guess, first off, Tiki Brown and her claims that the Quality Leering Center had been shut down? And then Quality Leering Center winds up having all kinds of children there.
Yeah.
The next day, and they can't get their story straight.
That's exactly what I think. And all they did was call up all of their neighbors and said, hey, come drop your kids off here. Come sit in our parking lot so we can pretend that we're open. And now that they pointed out we don't know how to spell, let's fix our sign. And so you've got the state saying one thing, and the Somali people are going, oh shit, we got caught. So let us do this over here, thinking that they're on the same sheet of music, and it just makes them all look stupid. I love it. When you can interrupt their comm plan from a military perspective, you're winning. And that's exactly what's being exposed. You are interrupting their plan. And that plays havoc on them. But you will find that they're going to have a planning meeting at some point, some emergency meeting. And we talked about that yesterday on KCON's show. They will get an auditor that's supposedly a third party auditor that is on their team. And we were naming some of them yesterday, like Kroll, who is basically a CIA front. And they won't be independent. And they will try to come up with a strategy. But you guys, at the end of the day, the only way this all stops is to return all of this shit to the states, to get the federal government out of all of it. It is the only way our republic has a chance. Every single thing that has been moved to the federal government, besides defense, interstate commerce, and foreign policy, has to be returned to the states. And that's 99% of the federal government. And that it has to go back that way. There's no, the senators, the 17th Amendment has to be repealed. Senators have to represent their states, not be elected from the populace. And hopefully that's where we're going, because anything less than that is unacceptable. We want our republic back, and we're going to demand our republic be restored. And that just has to happen. All of those programs that the federal government has appropriated onto themselves has to be returned to the states. Bridget?
And just to add on to that, and hand-counted physical ballots. 1 day voting, 1 day ballot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not even getting into the election thing.
To ensure that the people that are voted in are actually being voted in.
But see, I still think the senator thing's more important, because nothing would get past the Senate if they were appointed by the state legislatures like they used to be and represented the governor. It really wouldn't even matter. They would halt everything, because they would be removed from office if they didn't represent the state. But you're right. But I think in the pecking order of stuff, one of the top things on my list is the 17th Amendment, because if the senators represented the states and the states were actually taxed as opposed to individual people, and they had to write a check every year for all of the shit the federal government did, that shit would stop overnight. It would just go away, because they wouldn't do it. They would be strung up in the states if they continued to do that. And it solves the illegal immigration, illegal aliens as well, because you have to write a check for everybody in your state. And the state is not going to tolerate writing a check for illegal aliens, because the other Americans in that state would string up their government. They just wouldn't allow it. So the fundamental things about our republic has to be restored. Everything else is downstream of that. But yeah, we have to have an election day. Everybody, we just have to have that. So,
Colonel, what do you think about the grand jury system? Before the 1940s, grand juries used to be independent. In fact, there was a case in New York City in the 1930s where a grand jury actually indicted the prosecutor for having mafia ties and basically, being corrupt and covering for them. The grand jury was able to indict that prosecutor and bring in someone independent to have him prosecuted and sent to prison and removed from office. In 1946, they revised the federal rules of procedure. I think there was even a comment from one of the legislators at the time saying, why would we ever want to, let grand juries indict, sitting politicians. This, we can't control the system here.
That's why
the first 150 years of the Republic, it was the grand juries who almost controlled the prosecutors.
Yes.
And they were the ones who said, who brought, the interest of the community, who basically said, we see this corruption or fraud going on, and we want this investigated. And yes, it's it is a little bit of a scarier system in some ways, particularly if you're a high-profile individual.
I was going to say, scary for who?
It's scarier for the politicians.
Yes.
There's also a little bit less quality assurance in the process. People can show up. Some of the wild conspiracy theories out there aren't true, and it can sometimes cause problems for innocent people. But I think we need to start looking at this again. And if you can get a 3/4 vote on a grand jury, there's always going to be.
But the grand jury is just the first step. You still have to have a trial, in Florida,
the DOJ controls who gets prosecuted.
I know.
Who doesn't, and the CIA doesn't get prosecuted.
I know.
If you had grand juries in charge of it, they would say, you know what, we're going to prosecute.
We don't care. That's right. And in Florida, Governor DeSantis did have some independent grand juries meet, especially on COVID. He has used that system outside of the normal grand jury system in the state of Florida. He's done it like on 3 things. One was elections, and then they killed the guy that he appointed to be in charge of it. And I'm not even lying, that happened. And then that he did one on COVID, and he did one other one that was basically under that old-fashioned grand jury style. And that led to a lot of good things in Florida. But I agree with you. It is a more effective way to hold people that are protected by the current system accountable. In my opinion, it's a much more effective way to hold political figures and untouchables to account. And in Florida, where, as you guys can see, Florida has been a hotbed of this mess for a very long time. It is long overdue to have the accountability. And it also would then keep the CIA out of domestic operations because they wouldn't be protected here. So I'm all for it. Anything that gets more of these people thrown in jail, I'm for. But anyway. Okay. So with that, thank you guys all for being here. You guys have a happy new year. We are not going to have a show. And I think Alpha texted me earlier. Yeah, he canceled tonight. I'll get you up probably next Wednesday. Will be our next show with him. So no show tonight with Alpha Warrior. Renee did send me some stuff. If I get it put together, I started working on it this morning. I may just do a pop-up show to present some of that information. I know everybody's going to be busy going to parties and stuff like that. So it'll just be out there for you guys to watch later. Anyway. Okay. So
cool. I just want to say thank you if you do share. Yeah, that stuff I've been sending you.
Yes, it's very good stuff.
It's very juicy.
It is.
It's like the circles about to. We're hitting the points of the circle, like full circle here.
Yes.
So yeah, cool.
Also, I do want to. There's a whole bunch of different tools that people are posting out on X that allow you to look up like the small business loans and stuff like that. Um, and just so that you guys, I bookmarked one and I went this morning and I started clicking on a few of them for my hometown. Now, obviously, we're not going to have a lot of the same crap to the level that they have in some of these other states like Minnesota and Washington and California and stuff. But that doesn't mean you're immune to it. And plus, not only just in the state of Florida, but in Polk County, they do a very good job of uh, whatever. They're just very good at administration here, compared to what other people go through other places. I'm very blessed to live where I live. And we have the best sheriff in the whole world. But that doesn't mean we're immune to some of the federal program and its abuse. So I just very quickly, and I do want to do a show on this. I want to do it live, which is always kind of crazy. But what I did was I prioritized numerically the small business loans. And the top 3 small business loans on the guy's post, he had put together this like database, and you could just like put in your city and click on small business loan, which I did. And there, I noticed that just for hosting things, which we put on events here. So I talk with some of the local hotel owners to get special rates for some of the events that we have. So I have noticed that there is a lot more hotel owners in the local area that are Indian from India. And so I just so happened to do the numerical ranking, and the top 3, one started at 5 million, and then the other was slightly less than 5 million, but very close. Happened to be 3 hotels that are within like 5 minutes of my house. And what was interesting to me is that those 3 hotels, they're at 2 exits. We have I-4, Interstate 4, that goes through my hometown. So the one main exit to my town and the next one down, 3 hotels among those 2 exits, all got the largest in Lakeland, small business loans. One was, I think, a year ago. One may have been 2 years ago, but all within 12 months of each other. And just in 5 minutes, looking at some of the documentation, they have each other on their, not boards, on their business documents. So like one got a loan in his name, and then he is like the registered agent for number 2, which is in somebody else's name. And then number 2 is the registered agent for number 3, who's in someone else's name. But that guy is like the business manager for number 1. It's crazy. So basically, they're just using each other's names, and they're collectively all together, but they're using straw people's names of their group in order to get 3 different, almost $5 million small business loans, and all consolidated, like literally within a mile of each other, the 3 hotels. So I would encourage you guys to use that on your own hometowns and look and see who's getting that, but almost no American names were any of them. I think of the top 20 that I looked at, there may have been 3 businesses that are actual real businesses that those of us around, like a restaurant, like we've had a restaurant here for like 100 years. They had gotten one for like $1 million. But the rest of them were like things that are like in a strip mall that I didn't even recognize, never even heard of. So I do recommend you guys be your own research person, your own investigator of stuff in your own hometown. I did bookmark that, guys, so I'll repost it so you guys know which one I'm talking about. But I highly encourage you guys to do that, to find that kind of stuff. I'm not saying there's anything nefarious about it, but I do think it's interesting that, for example, the one person was posting that it cost you about $250,000 to get into like a gas station. And these people are taking out like $3 and $4 million loans from the SBA to do it. So what are they doing with the rest of that money? It's very nefarious. And I also want to know, which I did not get to, which I will do when I do the live look at it. I'm going to pull up their SunBiz documents and the real estate documents associated with it to see what they actually paid for the hotels that they're getting these $5 million loans for. So anyway, we all have to do our share. We all need to be good citizens and hold our government accountable. And if you see something, say something. That's the most important part. All right. With that, 2026 is going to be 2025 was a crazy year. 2026 is going to be the year I think the snowball gets down to the end of the mountain and takes out a whole lot of people with it. So, all right. With that, we're going to sign off. You guys take care. Have a safe New Year's Eve and a happy New Year's Day. And I will be back on Friday. Take care, everybody. See ya.